Every one of these scenes made you cry, made you stand up and cheer, made you believe for 2 hours that anything was possible. But almost none of them happened the way you saw them. The real story behind one of these films involves a lawsuit that tore a family apart on national television. Another one is built around a plane crash so devastating the screenwriters didn't dare put the worst parts on screen. And one of these movies, the one that made millions of people cry in a theater, is based on a discovery the most powerful sports league in America tried to bury. These are 10 football movies and 10 true stories hiding underneath them. Hollywood loves football. It's the perfect shape for a movie. An underdog, a season, a clock running out. But real life doesn't move like a screenplay. Real life is messier, slower, and sometimes a lot darker than anything a studio would greenlight. So filmmakers do what filmmakers always do. They take the truth and they shape it. They cut the boring parts. They build a villain where there wasn't always one. They give you an ending you can applaud. What's left behind, the version that didn't make the final cut, is usually the more interesting story. Let's start with the one that's still in the courtroom. In 2009, The Blind Side told America the story of Michael Oher, a homeless Memphis teenager taken in by a wealthy white family, the Tuohys, who helped turn him into a first-round NFL pick. Sandra Bullock won an Oscar for it. Audiences left the theater in tears. For over a decade, that was the story everyone believed. Then, in 2023, Michael Oher filed a legal petition that changed everything. He said the Tuohys never actually adopted him, not legally. What he'd signed years earlier was a conservatorship, a legal arrangement that let the family make business decisions in his name without making him their son in the eyes of the law. Oher claimed he didn't fully understand the difference when he signed it. The lawsuit alleged the family profited from a story built on the word adoption, a word Oher said was never legally true. The Tuohys pushed back hard, calling the claims hurtful and insisting the conservatorship was simply the only legal option available once Oher was already 18. Sean Tuohy said the family didn't take a cut from the film's profits beyond a standard share author Michael Lewis gave to everyone. So which version is true? Both sides have receipts, but here's what nobody disputes. The movie's most emotional scene, a family legally and lovingly adopting a struggling teenager, may never have legally happened at all. In his own memoir, Oher said something that should sit with you. He said he'd already survived everything that mattered, the poverty, the instability, the system, years before the Tuohys ever entered his life. The movie started his story in the wrong place. That's one story Hollywood didn't just dramatize. It's a story Hollywood may have gotten fundamentally wrong about whose story it even was. But this is where reality becomes even more uncomfortable, because that same pattern, a coach turned into something he never quite was, shows up again, just with a happier ending.
Remember the Titans gave us one of the most beloved sports movies ever made, a newly integrated Virginia high school team in 1971 learning to become brothers under a black head coach named Herman Boone. Most of the heart of that story is real. The team really did integrate. They really did win a state championship. But the way Hollywood told it left out something the real coach later revealed was actually worse than what made it to screen. In the film, a brick is thrown through Coach Boone's window, a moment meant to show the racism the family faced. The real Coach Boone confirmed the attack happened, but he said what was actually thrown through that window was something the filmmakers considered too disturbing to put on camera. And the dramatic final game, where corrupt referees supposedly conspire to make the Titans lose, that never happened. The real team didn't even need a comeback. They blew their opponents out, 27-0. Even the screenwriter admitted it outright. This wasn't a documentary. It was, in his words, about keeping the spirit of what happened, even if you change a lot of the details. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. The real players, the actual living members of that 1971 team, don't seem angry about any of it. Many of them say the exaggerated racism and invented villains don't bother them because the core message, coming together against impossible odds, was true enough for them to embrace the myth. Sometimes Hollywood doesn't lie to deceive you. It lies because the real story doesn't always look dramatic enough on paper, even when, in its own quiet way, it actually was. Speak of quiet stories that got the Hollywood treatment. One football legend's entire myth might be built on a lie far bigger than a brick through a window.
If you've seen Rudy, you remember the ending. A small, undersized walk-on named Daniel Rudiger finally gets into a Notre Dame game, sacks the quarterback on the final play, and gets carried off the field by his teammates. That moment actually happened. Rudy really was the third of 14 children from a working-class Illinois family. He really did struggle with undiagnosed dyslexia. He really did get rejected from Notre Dame multiple times before finally getting in. Rudy himself has said the film is roughly 90% accurate to his life. But that other 10%? It did serious damage to a real person's reputation. In the movie, head coach Dan Devine is the villain, cold, dismissive, refusing again and again to let Rudy dress for a single game. In real life, Devine led Notre Dame to a national championship and developed dozens of future NFL players. According to his own memoir, it was actually his idea to let Rudy suit up and play. He says he agreed to be a movie antagonist, but had no idea the script would make him look this heartless. So the man who may have actually given Rudy his shot got rewritten into the obstacle standing in his way. And here's a detail almost nobody knows. Years before any of this, a teenage Rudy locked eyes with Elvis Presley outside a concert hall while working security as a student. It's the kind of detail that sounds made up. It isn't. Real life occasionally writes scenes a screenwriter wouldn't dare invent. But what happened next, in a much darker corner of football history, makes Rudy's villain problem look small by comparison. On November 14, 1970, a chartered plane carrying the Marshall University football team crashed on its descent into West Virginia. Every single person on board died. 75 people. 37 of them were players. We Are Marshall tells the story of what came after, a university and a town rebuilding a football program and a community from absolutely nothing. The broad strokes are true and devastating exactly as shown, but the filmmakers made a choice that surprised even people close to the story. They combined real survivors and grieving family members into invented composite characters. The screenwriter later explained why. There were simply too many individual tragedies to put on screen without overwhelming the audience. Telling every single story would have meant telling none of them well. One detail the movie gets wrong might be the most human one. The film shows the rebuilding coach giving an emotional, fired-up speech declaring that the funerals end today. In real life, according to people who were there, nothing that dramatic was ever said. The grief in Huntington, West Virginia didn't end on cue. It just kept going, quietly, for years. Even the team's now famous rallying chant, "We are Marshall," didn't actually exist in 1970. It wasn't born until more than a decade later. This is a story Hollywood didn't really need to exaggerate. The truth was already unbearable. All they really changed was how fast the pain was allowed to heal. Because real grief doesn't fit inside a 2-hour runtime. Another story is even more surprising because this time the friendship at the center of the film was real. But the man who turned it into a movie wasn't even in the room when it mattered most.
In 1967, the Chicago Bears made Brian Piccolo and Gale Sayers roommates on road trips, the first interracial roommate pairing in NFL history. One was a quiet, brilliant black running back already considered a star. The other was a white, undrafted free agent fighting just to make the roster. They didn't like each other at first. Sayers later admitted Piccolo annoyed him for nearly 2 years straight. But somewhere in that friction, something real formed. Then, in 1969, Piccolo was diagnosed with cancer. He died the following year. He was 26 years old. Brian's song turned that friendship and that loss into one of the most quietly devastating films ever made for television. And almost everything about the emotional core is true. Sayers really did give a speech accepting an award on Piccolo's behalf, telling a room full of people to love his dying friend the way he did. That speech is recreated almost word for word in the film. But one detail got swapped for simplicity. The film shows legendary coach George Halas managing the team through Piccolo's illness. In reality, Halas had already retired. It was a different coach, Jim Dooley, in charge during that period. Halas just had a bigger, more recognizable name. It's such a small change, it's almost forgettable, which says something important. Not every Hollywood distortion is a scandal. Sometimes it's just a studio swapping one name for one people would actually recognize. But this is where reality becomes darker again. Because the next story isn't about what a studio simplified. It's about what an entire league spent years trying to make disappear.
In 2002, a Nigerian-born forensic pathologist named Dr. Bennett Omalu was handed a routine autopsy in Pittsburgh. The body belonged to Mike Webster, a Hall of Fame center, a legend, a man who by the end of his life was living out of a truck, gluing his own rotting teeth back together and tasering himself just to fall asleep. Omalu didn't know much about football. That turned out to be the only reason he was willing to look closer. What he found inside Webster's brain was a disease nobody had documented in a football player before. A buildup of proteins slowly destroying the parts of the brain responsible for mood, memory, and self-control. He named it chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. Omalu assumed the NFL would want this information. He has said, in his own words, that he was naive enough to believe the league would be grateful. Instead, the NFL published its own research disputing his findings and reportedly tried to get his original study retracted by accusing him of academic fraud. When the league held its own concussion summit, gathering 300 doctors and scientists, Omalu wasn't invited. Concussion, starring Will Smith, dramatized this entire fight years later. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This might be the one film on this list where the real story is actually scarier than the movie version. The film shows one doctor up against a powerful institution. The real history shows that same institution actively working to discredit, isolate, and silence him while players kept getting hit in the head year after year, season after season. Mike Webster's own son now works at a brain injury research institute, still trying to finish the fight his father's death accidentally started. This is the story where Hollywood didn't need to dramatize anything. If anything, it had to hold back because the full truth was almost too unbelievable to put in a PG-13 movie. 10 movies, 10 true stories, and almost none of them happened exactly the way you remember watching them. A teenager's adoption that might not have legally existed. A coach turned into a movie villain who may have actually been the hero. A community whose grief was compressed into 90 minutes because the truth was too heavy for a runtime. A friendship that was completely real, wrapped around a death that came far too soon. And a doctor who told the truth about America's most powerful sports league and was punished for it. Hollywood didn't invent these stories, it just decided which parts of them you were allowed to see. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The movie is never the whole story, it's just the version somebody decided was the most useful one to tell.
Friday Night Lights, 2004. Based on the non-fiction book by H.G. Bissinger, this film depicts the 1988 season of the Permian High School Panthers in Odessa, Texas. The Express, the Ernie Davis story, 2008. This movie tells the life of Ernie Davis, the first African-American to win the Heisman Trophy. The movie highlights his struggles with racism during the late 1950s and his legendary run at Syracuse University. Invincible, 2006. Mark Wahlberg stars as Vince Papale, a 30-year-old bartender who becomes a Philadelphia Eagles legend through an open tryout. The movie paints Papale as a down-on-his-luck noob who had never played organized football, creating a classic underdog narrative of an ordinary man thrust into the pro.
These 10 football movies made us believe in underdogs, in second chances, in the idea that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That part was never the lie. The lie, if you can even call it that, was the idea that any of these stories could fit cleanly into 2 hours. They couldn't. Real life never does. So now that you know what actually happened behind the scenes, which of these real-life stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if this kind of story belongs in your feed, you know what to do next.